talk about yourself a bit, because you come from a bit of a legal background, and you, in
Right.
fact, worked with the former President Barack Obama.
I did. Background-wise, after I came out of law school, I was a homicide prosecutor, violent crime prosecutor for almost 10 years, and then went to work for then Deputy Attorney General Eric Holder, and then started working on the campaign for the future president. And after that, moved into private practice and was there for 12 years, and then got elected into this completely stress-free, easy day-to-day job 11 years ago. So I really didn't have much of a union background, certainly other than playing sports in college. Didn't really come from a traditional sports background as either a player or an agent or someone in the sports business. But got a call about whether I would be interested in this job, and it's been 11 years. It's hard to believe. Well, actually, in the last 2 months, it's I believe it. I believe it.
I'm sure you do, and you obviously settled very well into it. What was the relationship like back then when you took over with the teams, with the NFL owners, and how they viewed the player?
Yeah, look, the relationship between the league and the union is a lot like what it is now. It can be fairly contentious. It was a little difficult in the first 2 years trying to teach players that the league wasn't really interested in a partnership. They are interested in control. And the job of a union is to fight back against that with every means that they have at their disposal. But first and foremost, it's about educating the player to understand what his role is in this scheme of sports. And it requires sometimes yanking a player out of the mindset of being an athlete, because you are so conditioned to simply show up on time, play your heart out, and the league and the teams use that against our players, because all of the things that they whisper to them about family and togetherness and brotherhood, and we're all in it together. Well, we're actually not. The owners are in it for a very, very long period of time. And the players are there for just a very short period of time.
And in terms of dealing with the NFL owners, you've got a lot of money, you've got a lot of ego, and some of these guys don't really respect the player. As you say, they only average about 3 years playing the game on average. So you can almost see why they would see them as commodities and disposable commodities sometimes.
Well, and that's the system that the owners are used to. They understand the business side of it very well. The players tend to not understand the business side of it very well coming out of college. They take advantage of that. And the owners really don't want a system where you are an equal partner, because if they have to deal with you or me as equals, then it's a strategic, there's a strategic equality there, and you have to bargain in good faith, and you have to engage in being a good business partner. What I realized very quickly was the league isn't really interested in being a good business partner, in the athletes doing what they're told and simply performing. And then when it's time for them to get rid of an athlete, that decision is just goodbye.
Going into CBAs then, DeMaurice, short of hostage negotiations, this is the ultimate deal-making experience. I mean, not even the recent one, because in 2011 there was a lockout as well around your negotiations. So the pressure involved in this must be huge.
It's a lot of pressure, and I think that there are very few people. You're probably right, other than hostage negotiators really understand the pressure. I try to explain to people all the time that it's not a business deal. It's not a straight line, linear, merger and acquisition. It's not even a hostile takeover. It's not a deal between two business entities, because at the end of the day, in a civil or a business context, you have two parties coming together and both parties want to benefit from the deal. What I tell our players all the time, none of our NFL owners are ever going to be a dollar poorer, ever. So when you're going into a business deal with someone where the only thing they are looking at is incremental or additive value, the players on the other side, if they don't get a deal done or if they go through a work stoppage, they're going through a negative or a loss calculation. No owner is going into a CBA negotiation with a concern of a loss proposition. And the toughest thing for players is you have to try to keep the gains that you have and protect those. You want to certainly try to achieve more, but every collective bargaining agreement necessarily puts at risk, in some respects, those things that you already have. And so for us, when we came into this collective bargaining agreement, the opportunity to try to do a deal early, right? You substantially decrease the risk of losing the things that you have. And if you can take advantage of that and try to tap into some of the parallel equities between you and the owners, you never truly achieve equality. You just get closer to equal goals. And that's, but it is not stress-free. I mean, it is probably, I've tried homicide cases, I've tried rape cases, I've tried kidnapping cases. I would put this easily in the top 3 of the most stressful things I've ever done.
It just sounds
now
so
that we've talked everybody out of ever wanting to do this.
In terms of the actual CBA itself, there's no point going down the rabbit hole of trying to go through every single point. But from rugby's point of view, there was one very interesting thing that stood out, which was the number of games per season, and that's moved from 16 to 17. Now,
right.
in rugby per season, it wouldn't be unheard of to have a player playing 30 or more games. So the arm wrestle of moving from 16 to 17 games and getting a revenue share already was a win for most rugby people, I imagine.
Right.
Why was there so much resistance to moving to an extra game per season during the negotiations?
Yeah, I think there was an emotional element to it. I also think that this was the first collective bargaining agreement, probably in history, that has played out in a social media environment. And so you take that somewhat politicized social media environment and shake well. and so I think what happened was you had a lot of people, much like a presidential campaign, start to opine about their referendum on the deal. Some of them did before it was done, so they clearly couldn't have understood what was in it. And I think that you also have a diverse membership that is not only diverse, economically, racially, but also diverse. Given if you're a player and you come to them and you say there's a possibility of adding an extra game, but your pay is going to go up, your pensions are going to increase, your health care is going to increase, your overall revenue share is going to increase. There were clearly the majority of players that we talked to during the year who said, yes, I will do that. If I get an extra game check, that is worth it to me. There are some players who said, under no circumstances would I ever want to play 17 games. And, therein lies the man in the arena. You represent both of them. You can't make either of them completely happy. So you have to have a system where the minority is heard, majority rules, and you try to put something together that decrease the risk of playing an extra game. I think for all unions going forward, I will tell you, having gone through this, that the social media impact on your membership and therefore on your negotiations is a real and at least from where I sit, a troubling factor. That as long as we communicate directly with our membership, if they're hearing the facts from us, they won't be influenced by things on the outside. I know now that that's not true.
Okay. So social media was a massive part of this, because I suppose I want to talk about the player buy-in and, how you can get so many players to actually not just turn up and tick a box, yes or no,
right,
but actually be
right.
really, and this is what was so impressive from this side of the pond, was to see how many players were actively engaged in this, that knew about what was going on. Sure, some of them were following their mates or were listening to what was said on social, but actually cared about this. And that would be another question I'd have for you in terms of how do you get players so bought in to what are essentially very legalistic kind of discussions.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, right? It's a blessing in the sense that you want your union members to be actively engaged and passionate about it. At the same time, you always want a disciplined and courteous conversation, right? And by conversation, I mean, a mental engagement. You want that. And I think the blessing part of it is players were certainly passionate and engaged. I think the curse part of it was you had some players who would rather talk on social media than talk in the locker room.
Sure.
And you had some players who would rather talk on social media that I've never seen in a team meeting. And that's frustrating because, you start to question exactly what's the motivation. And then, that's just that's just the players. That's just your mates. We are, we're the biggest sport in the league. We're the biggest sport in the U.S. It also created a opportunity for people outside of the players and outside of our nuclear entity to just chime in from the bleacher seats. And because I do think that a certain amount of this became quote unquote entertainment. And, I'm not sure there's anything to do about that. It is what it is. But, as I continue to unpack and do the postmortem on this, I do believe that there is going to be an increased communication challenge going forward. And that I don't have any answers. I can just raise a lot of questions.
Moving away from the collective bargaining agreements, which I'm sure you're happy to do after all the years of back and forth.
Yeah.
Your job is also a political one, apart from the fact you're based in Washington and have a political background. We saw that with the Colin Kaepernick, all that went on with that. And there's no point drilling down into that because it was played out very much in public. Yeah. But how much of your job is politics? And the NFL and football in America is very aligned with the military and patriotism.
Yes.
So that must have an impact on what you do day to day.
It really does. You can't act as if what we're doing is in some sort of social, political ecosystem that we don't make decisions in that politically charged ecosystem. In addition to the Colin Kaepernick situation, we went through a very public issue around the national anthem, and players, long after Colin had left, players who were kneeling, and owners would say things, players would say things, the union would say things, people on the outside would say things, the president of the United States might happen to say a few things. To ignore the politics is to do so at your own peril. Your constituents, your membership, have very strong political feelings about things, just personally, but also they are sensitive is the wrong word. They are also aware of how they are perceived politically, socially, culturally, and so you're constantly making decisions, being aware of a number of unstable, constantly changing headwinds that you just have to manage. And so for us, we've instilled a few principles to kind of guide us on how we navigate through this. One of the first is make a decision. And we call it, put that flag in the ground. The second one is to make sure that everything we do is strictly aligned with traditional union practices. So, and the reason why I believe that is so important is if you aren't grounding yourself in what's best for your membership, what's best for the role of the union, what's best for each individual player, if you're not grounded in those things, then you're left with simply trying to manage the political headwinds. And something that you might want to do on a Tuesday might be something that's inconsistent with a political movement on a Wednesday. So, we make a decision. We plant our union flag in the ground about what we are going to wrap ourselves around. When it came to the anthem, we believe our players are entitled to free speech. So it really never became do we like this person or do we not like this person? Do we have some sort of issue with it being Republican? Do we have it with being a Democrat? No. We believe that our members were entitled to free speech. That's it.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes there's just no easy answer on certain things. And another major issue that played out with you guys, and obviously is a major issue for us in rugby on a very regular basis, is that of concussion. What lessons do you think the NFL and the NFLPA can learn from that when you look back over the last 10 years in your sport?
Yeah, in 10 years ago, we decided to become extremely aggressive about managing concussions. I think I got elected in March. Well, I got elected in March of 2009. I think I was testifying in Congress by September. So that became a very quick issue. And for us, when you talk about aligning your interest early, that was an issue where your players want to play. And some of them, all of them are taught to play through injury. So we had to decide very quickly what was going to be the position of the union. And there couldn't be any position of the union that doesn't tear health and safety as a non-negotiable starting point. And so going forward, everything we've done has been in a prism or a paradigm of how do you do this, but nonetheless do your best to protect the health and safety of the individual athlete. And that is not only a collective bargaining play. It's also public messaging. It's messaging to your members. But sometimes your members can be the toughest people to deal with in this circumstance. And, what I tell our guys is I am never going to lie to you. I'm going to be brutally honest and truthful because that's how we have to deal with each other. I know that you are taught to play hurt. These are the risks. And sometimes we have to come up with, and we came up with protocols that frankly not all of our guys agreed with. I have been yelled at by a fair number of players after they've been pulled out of a game on the following Monday, upset that I'm somehow ruining football, or I'm negatively impacting their career. I always have the same message. My job is to do my best to keep you safe.
And do you think that there has been an understanding and a learning over the last couple of years and you're not having those fights with players as much now because they understand these things a bit more?
100%. For us, we started the quote unquote, we wrote the concussion protocol for players, not only getting baseline testing, annual testing, and then what happens if we believe that you've had a concussive event on the field. I mean, we wrote those things actually in 2010, which is hard to believe. But now, high schools are doing it. And slowly, I mean, this is how long I've been in the job. There are players who were in high school when we wrote that, and they grew up with a concussion protocol that we helped write. And so they've just moved through a system where they are far more used to it. We still lag a bit in the NCAA. They haven't fully adopted all of the rules that we have, but because it's starting in high schools and junior high schools, you're absolutely right. Far less fights, far less discussions. And what I love, players are making decisions on their own about when they should stop playing. And that's what we want.
Well, yeah, that's a good indicator about how far it's come. DeMaurice, listen, just finally, it's obviously we're both in our homes, one in Dublin, one in DC. Whenever this lockdown ends, and we don't really know, how do you think the NFL season is going to be impacted?
Yeah, and right now we don't know. I established a COVID task force about 3 weeks ago. We hired outside consultants from Harvard and University of Massachusetts and Mass General to advise us on what we think we should be doing. And we had a conference call with our reps last night. Look, we've made it clear to them that this is a dangerous virus, and the shelters in place need to happen in order to slow the spread of this disease. The reality is we will not be completely out of the coronavirus pandemic by August or September. What does that mean for the start of the season? I don't know. What does it mean for fans being in the stands? I don't know. But we've moving to a virtual team workouts now. So the teams will be talking to our players, engaging in our players, both in classroom and workouts virtually, which is kind of cool because you kind of realize you don't have to be at the facility. But will there be an impact to our season? Absolutely. I just don't know to what extent and for how long.
It's a strange time. I guess nobody really has the answers, but I mean, somebody did say to me the other day that they think sport and life, but mainly sport, will never be the same again, because there's a good chance that stadiums will not be allowed to fill for quite some time.
I think the social distancing as the primary way to manage the spread of this it is going to last for a long time, because if you don't have the ability to mass test, distancing becomes the next best step. Now, could it change if there's a point of contact test that can render a decision quickly? Maybe. If we find out good news about antibodies, and it looks like hypothetically that if you get it, you might have an antibody, which means you won't get it again. Maybe that changes. But do I think that for a significant period of time, there's going to be a fan in-game experience impact to this? Yes. We just don't know. I mean, is this something that could increase during the cold weather? Nobody really knows. So, one of the things I think we'll probably do, all of us, you, I, everybody else are certainly tied through Uniglobal as well. We should all probably get together very soon and just talk about what our respective sports are doing, because, nobody has an answer. So we're just trying to learn as much as we can from each other. But I think that would be a good idea for at least all of the unions to be linked up with what we're doing. And I think that's a smart play for us to do. But I think to a certain extent, it is a new normal.
Yeah, because this doesn't recognize borders and doesn't recognize sports. So we're all kind of in this together. Just final question, how do you see the players' movement growing over the next couple of years? Because you've been at the forefront for the last decade, really. Do you see this as something that will, continue to grow, not just in America, not just among the NFL, but in other sports?
Look, I think the one silver lining about this virus is that it has empowered people to become more in control of their own destiny. And I think that the player movement, you've seen it increase in college sports. You and I have seen it increase internationally. But I do think that one silver lining of this is players in the Olympic movement started to say, wait a minute, there is no way that the Summer Olympics are going to be safe to play. And you and I saw the International Olympic Committee push back on that until even they realized that they would have to comply with what's in the best health and safety interest of the athlete. I think that only increases the movement and increases our power. And I do think that because sports at your level and at my level generate a tremendous amount of revenue, there is always going to be that push from the other side to get the business going faster or as fast as possible. The only people who can stand in the bridge of that are a collective group of athletes. And so all of us are going to have some really tough decisions to make and some issues to balance. But, look, whether that nets out to whether we're playing or nets out that we're not playing, in either case, our voice is heard. And I think that's where all of us have to come together and make sure that our voice is heard at exactly the right moment and at exactly the right time.
DeMaurice Smith, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us from your home in
Washington.
And we shall talk to you again, my friend.
You too. Take care, my friend.